At my niece's birthday planning, my dad pointed and said, "If you don't pay, you're not family." So I packed my life into boxes and my mother died in early 2016, and with her went the center of everything. She passed away from a rare lung condition that devoured her life within 8 brutal months. By the end, she barely recognized the house she once filled with warmth and rhythm. Her final days were spent in a hospital bed, sunlit only by the slivers of light that broke through heavy Milwaukee skies. I was 28 when she looked up at me with pale, thinning eyes. Her fingers, once steady and warm, trembled as they closed around mine with intent. "Promise me you'll take care of your father," she whispered. "He's not built for solitude. He doesn't know how to live without me." Her voice was barely audible, but the weight of those words clung like iron. I promised her that afternoon, not out of obligation, but because I truly believed I could handle it. My dad, Elliot, was once the loudest voice in the room, a mechanic turned small business owner with grease-stained knuckles and thick forearms. But after she died, he started moving like a man underwater. Nothing interested him anymore. He sat in his recliner for hours, staring at silent walls, as if waiting for them to speak. I had my own apartment about 10 minutes away. Quiet place, decent view, low rent. But one night, maybe 6 weeks after the funeral, he called sounding more fragile than I'd ever heard him. "Can you stay here for a while?" he asked, clearing his throat. "This place, it's just too empty." The promise echoed through my mind like a church bell. So I told him yes. It was supposed to be temporary, just a few months to help him adjust and recover. I packed light, told my landlord I'd be subletting, and moved back into the home I grew up in. The rooms hadn't changed, but everything else had. Even the air felt different, like it refused to move the same way it used to. The first few months passed quietly. I worked weekdays from 9 to 6, managing operations at a mid-tier logistics firm near downtown. Dad mostly stayed home, watering his backyard tomatoes, watching old baseball reruns, or calling cousins he hadn't spoken to in years. We shared dinner most nights, him always asking how work was, me always dodging the parts one didn't want to explain. Soon, I took over most of the bills, not because he asked, but because it felt right. I knew his small business had fizzled after Mom died, and he hadn't touched a paycheck since. At first, I didn't calculate how much I was spending. It felt irrelevant. He was grieving. I was fulfilling a promise. But eventually, I realized I was pouring nearly $1,700 a month into this quiet life: groceries, utilities, internet, maintenance, and the general cost of living with someone who had stopped noticing the world. Still, there was no resentment. He would say things like, "You take such good care of me," and those words always softened the corners of my weariness. I reminded myself that this was the least I could do. One more year, I thought. One more year to make sure he's truly okay. That you're stretched into another, and then another. The apartment I was subletting turned into a long-term rental. I watched as people came and went from that place, while I remained frozen in time inside the house that now smelled like disinfectant and nostalgia. Then came the real shift, the moment the balance tipped in a way I couldn't undo. It happened on an otherwise uneventful Sunday. I had just finished updating spreadsheets for a shipping forecast when I heard him on the phone in the living room. I couldn't hear who he was talking to at first, but his voice was unusually warm. "You should come stay with us," he said. "The house is big, and Grant's still here." I walked into the hallway, just in time to hear him say, "Don't worry about the money. We'll figure things out. Just come home." He was talking to my sister. Marcy had been living in Detroit since her early 20s, married to a guy I'd met twice and disliked instantly. She had just filed for divorce a few months prior. Now, she was moving back in with Dad, bringing her 4-year-old daughter, Olive. I didn't object. How could I? She was family. She needed support. That's what families do. But the moment Marcy and Olive walked through the door, the house changed. It was no longer a place of quiet healing. It became something else, louder, tighter, more chaotic. The living room, once shared peacefully between me and my father, was overtaken by cartoon noise and toddler toys. The kitchen became ground zero for special meal prep, tiny-shaped pastas, fruit-only yogurts, and juice boxes stacked like supply crates. Olive was bright and curious and wildly energetic. She had a laugh that bounced through the hallways and eyes that could melt even the hardest stare. But what broke me wasn't Olive. It was everything else, the way Marcy assumed I'd be okay footing the bills. The way Dad acted like the house was still his to offer. The way my personal space started vanishing, one borrowed item at a time. Within weeks, I found my headphones missing from my desk. They were in Marcy's room, playing lullabies for Olive. My router was unplugged and moved. My coffee maker ended up in their side of the house. My room, the one place I had left, was no longer untouched. I didn't complain. Not at first. I told myself it was temporary again. But that wasn't true. And what I didn't know then was that things were only going to get worse. The shift was quiet at first, small, subtle changes that didn't seem malicious. Harmony's toys would appear where my books used to sit. The coffee table was now a parking garage for tiny plastic cars. By the second week, I had to step over building blocks just to get to the kitchen. At first, I thought, no big deal. It's just a kid being a kid. But then her mess started creeping closer to my bedroom, like vines pushing under a locked door. One day, I came home to find a doll hospital set up directly outside my room. Folded towels, bandages made from tissues, tiny patient files scribbled in crayon. It was creative, sure, but all I could think about was how my space had become a playground for someone else's fantasy. When I asked Marcy to move it, she laughed like I was the unreasonable one. "Come on, Grant," she said. "She's 4. Let her play. It's not hurting anyone." Except it was. It was hurting the one thing I had left, my boundaries. I didn't need silence or solitude every minute of the day, but I needed a corner of the world that belonged to me. What I got instead was noise, clutter, and the slow evaporation of privacy. Even the kitchen, my refuge after work, had transformed into a daycare lunchroom. Every shelf in the fridge was packed with yogurt pouches, juice boxes, and animal-shaped cheese snacks. It got to the point where I had to stack my groceries on top of theirs just to make room. Worse than the clutter was the entitlement. Marcy had been living with us for over a month, and not once had she offered to split costs or buy groceries. I figured maybe she was saving money, trying to land on her feet. But then I saw her walking in with shopping bags, new clothes for her, designer leggings for Harmony, and high-end baby shampoo I definitely didn't buy. During a casual conversation, she mentioned getting $1,200 a month in child support. My jaw tensed when I heard that. I wasn't expecting her to hand over half her check, but how could she afford brand-name clothes and not chip in for groceries? The real gut punch came from Harmony herself. One evening, as I was coming home late from work, she ran up to me barefoot and smiling. Her eyes sparkled as she asked, "Uncle Grant, did you bring me cupcakes? Mommy says you're good at making money." My hand froze on the doorknob. That sentence cut deeper than it should have. Not because she meant harm, she didn't, but because it was so clear that my sister had been discussing my income with her child like I was an ATM with legs. That night, I sat in my room and realized something ugly. I wasn't being treated like a family member. I was a resource. I was the guy who made things easier, who paid the bills and picked up the slack. That realization didn't make me angry yet. It just left me hollow. Over the next few weeks, that hollow feeling expanded. My belongings began disappearing like items in a shared dorm room. My wireless headphones vanished from my desk one afternoon. I later found them on Marcy's nightstand, plugged into a tablet showing kids' cartoons. She didn't ask. She didn't apologize. She just shrugged and said, "We needed them." Harmony wouldn't sleep without music. The Wi-Fi router was the next casualty. I kept it in my room because I paid for the plan, and I used it to work remotely twice a week. One morning, I woke up to no signal. I followed the cable trail to Marcy's room and found the router sitting on her dresser, its lights blinking like nothing had happened. When I asked her about it, she gave me a look of utter confusion, like I was being dramatic. "The signal's stronger in here," she said, "and Harmony needs the internet for her learning videos." I wanted to yell. I wanted to list every item they had moved, every dollar I had spent, every quiet moment they had stolen. Instead, I bought a lock for my door the next day. I didn't explain it. I didn't justify it. I just screwed it into place and told myself, this is the line. No more. Dad didn't like it. He called me to the living room that same evening, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Why would you do that?" he asked, his tone almost hurt. "We're family, Grant. Why would you put a lock on your door?" I tried to explain that it wasn't about trust, but privacy. "I have work stuff in there. Expensive equipment," I said. He waved his hand dismissively. "We don't lock each other out in this family." You're acting like a stranger in your own home. That word, stranger, burned like acid. How could I be a stranger when I was the only one paying the bills? Since when was it wrong to want personal space? The message was clear. In this house, asking for boundaries made you the problem. But using people's things, ignoring their privacy, and freeloading off their income, that was just family love. Expenses climbed as winter rolled in. The heating bill doubled. The washer ran daily. My monthly spending ballooned to nearly $2,900, and still no one offered to help. So I decided to speak up. One evening, while we were all eating dinner, Marcy on her phone, Harmony peeling apart her grilled cheese, I put my fork down and cleared my throat. The household bills are getting pretty steep, I said calmly. I think we should talk about dividing the costs. Dad's eyes narrowed before I even finished my sentence. Marcy stopped chewing. I asked Marcy directly, "Do you have any plans to start contributing soon?" The table went dead silent. Marcy looked at her plate. Dad sipped his water. Only Harmony kept eating, blissfully unaware that the tension was climbing like smoke in the room. After a long pause, Marcy mumbled something about returning to work soon, but gave no details. No dates. No effort. So I said what I had been thinking for weeks. If no one's willing to set a timeline, I think I'm going to move out. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Dad spoke, his tone sharper than I'd heard in years. Your mother would be heartbroken to see you put money above family. That was the moment something inside me cracked. He had pulled out the one weapon he knew could wound me, her memory. The guilt rushed in instantly, heavy and unwelcome. I thought of her final words, of the promise I made, and I felt like I was betraying her all over again. But deeper still, another thought crept in, one I had been resisting for far too long. Maybe I had already kept my promise. Maybe the real betrayal was what they were doing to me. The final push came with Harmony's 5th birthday, though it had been brewing long before that. Marcy and my father spent weeks planning her party without ever including me. I overheard everything: talks about bounce houses, princess costumes, themed tableware, and a towering castle-shaped cake. Every detail was arranged over coffee in the living room while I worked in my room just feet away. Not once did anyone come to ask what I thought. Not about the party. Not about the costs. Not about my role. One afternoon, I walked past Marcy as she sat on the couch with her laptop open. She was pointing to cake designs, describing them with a level of detail usually reserved for weddings. "This one's 3 tiers with sugar crystal turrets," she said. $300. But totally worth it. Dad nodded along without blinking. "Order it. Harmony will love it." Just like that, it was settled. It wasn't even up for discussion. A few days later, I found a list pinned to the fridge with nearly 40 names scribbled on it. Parents and kids, neighbors and distant cousins. They weren't hosting a party. They were throwing a full-scale event. When I asked about it, Dad shrugged and said, "We'll put up a big tent in the backyard. Rent tables and chairs. Should be fun." Again, no one asked who was going to pay for it. Then, on the Sunday before the party, I was passing by the hallway when I heard soft crying coming from Marcy's room. I paused, not meaning to eavesdrop, but the voices carried through the barely closed door. Harmony was sobbing. Between her tears, I heard her say, "But Mommy, you promised the biggest birthday ever." Marcy replied softly, "I did, sweetie. And Uncle Grant's going to take care of everything. He loves you so much." I froze right there in the hall. In that moment, I wasn't angry. I was stunned. They had promised a child a fantasy and used my name to seal the deal. They hadn't just planned a party. They'd scripted an emotional ambush. How was I supposed to say no without looking like the villain in a 5-year-old's storybook? That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and realized I was trapped in a plan I had never agreed to. And the worst part? They knew exactly what they were doing. 3 days before the party, I walked into the living room after work and saw them waiting. Dad with a printed spreadsheet, Marcy beside him with that familiar expectant look. They didn't even ease into it. "Sit down. We need to talk about the birthday," Dad said immediately. I sat, already knowing what was coming. He handed me a paper with the cost breakdown. Cake, tent, food, entertainer. Altogether, it's just under $2,000, he said, as if it were a grocery list. "I think you should handle it. Harmony is your niece, after all." The word "no" came out of me before I even felt it. Calm, direct, final. Their faces shifted instantly, like they hadn't prepared for resistance. Marcy looked stunned. But I already booked everything, she stammered. I let out a low laugh, not out of humor, but disbelief. That's your problem. You made those decisions without talking to me. Dad leaned in, trying to regain control. It's just a party, Grant. Don't be so stingy. That's when the heat rose in my chest. I exhaled slowly, not wanting to yell. Neither of you asked me. You just assumed. I'm not paying for something I didn't agree to. I stood up. And if you won't respect me, don't expect my money. I turned and left the room, but not before catching their expressions, shocked, confused, a little furious. 30 minutes later, there was a knock on my bedroom door. I considered ignoring it, but I knew it would only escalate. When I opened it, Dad stepped in, already mid-sentence. You have to pay for this party, he said, like it was law. I didn't respond immediately. I just looked at him and asked, why? Without hesitation, he said, because you have a good job, a rental property, and your sister is struggling. I stood silently for a moment, his words sinking in. He didn't see me as someone who had sacrificed anything. He saw me as someone who owed them because I had more. I replied slowly. I've been paying nearly $3,000 a month since Marcy moved in. Before that, it was almost $2,000. I'm not an ATM. He raised his voice. That's enough. Are you seriously keeping score with your own family? I felt my temper spike, but I held it. I'm not keeping score. I'm stating facts. I've carried this household while you two treated it like a free hotel. He wouldn't back down. You've saved so much living here rent-free. All we've asked is to help with expenses, and now you're complaining. I blinked in disbelief. Rent-free? I asked. I had my own place. I left it to come help you. I was spending $1,500 a month on my own. Since moving here, I've spent more than twice that. What savings are you talking about? His face darkened. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. He just said one sentence that changed everything. If you don't pay for Harmony's birthday, then you're no longer part of this family. I stared at him, trying to process whether he actually meant it. His eyes didn't waver. He meant every word. In that moment, something inside me went quiet. Not broken, just still. It was like watching a bridge you had built crumble in real time, not from one explosion, but from years of weight finally snapping the bolts loose. Without yelling, without crying, I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "All right, I understand." Then I shut the door, walked to my closet, and began packing. Not a short trip, not a weekend bag. Everything. Every shirt, every pair of jeans, every document. My laptop, my router, my headphones. I packed it all, methodically, like I was shedding an identity I no longer recognized. Marcy walked in unannounced and froze when she saw the open luggage. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice panicked. "I'm moving out," I said calmly, not even looking up. "You can't be serious," she said. "All this over a birthday?" I didn't answer. I just kept folding. She tried again, but this time with pleading eyes. "You're not really leaving us, are you?" I zipped the suitcase shut and carried it past her. At around 11, I was hauling the last of my things to the car when Dad came to the front door. He looked tired, smaller than I remembered. "What are you doing?" he asked. I didn't pause. "I'm doing exactly what you said. I'm not paying. So I guess we're not family anymore." He didn't try to stop me. He didn't apologize. He just said, "You'll regret this one day." I shut the trunk, got in the car, and drove away. The first night in the motel, I thought I'd be restless, unable to sleep. But instead, I collapsed into the stiff mattress and drifted off almost immediately. The silence was striking, no toys clattering down the hallway, no TV humming from the next room. It was quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I didn't even dream. I just slept. For the next 2 days, I didn't hear a word from anyone. No calls, no texts, no emails, nothing. I had expected them to reach out, to send at least one half-hearted message to bring me back. Instead, I got pure silence, like I had been erased from their story completely. At first, I assumed they were giving me space. But by day 3, I realized they weren't reaching out because they thought I'd break and come crawling back. They thought I'd crack under the weight of guilt they had spent years building inside me. They thought I'd feel bad for leaving my father, bad for walking out on my niece's party, bad for abandoning my family over money. But I didn't feel bad. I felt awake for the first time in a long time. Awake and alert to the ways they had twisted love into leverage. By day 4, I had found a studio apartment in the southern part of Racine. It wasn't glamorous. Bare walls, a window facing a brick wall, and furniture that belonged in a nursing home. But it was mine. I paid the deposit up front, signed a 6-month lease, and started moving my boxes in the next day. I didn't have much, but what I had was finally under my control. The following afternoon, while unpacking a box of kitchen gear, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. My father's voice came through, tight, clipped, irritated. "You need to come home," he said. No apology, no softness, just a demand. I let him finish. Then I said nothing and ended the call without a word. That evening, I blocked his number, then Marcy's, and finally every shared family group chat. I didn't want explanations. I didn't want apologies laced with manipulation. I just wanted distance. The silence returned, and I welcomed it like an old friend. I worked. I cooked. I bought a used mattress and a table that wobbled slightly on the right leg. It wasn't perfect, but every inch of it belonged to me. About 2 weeks later, I pulled into my new driveway and noticed a familiar blue Honda parked across the street. My stomach clenched before I even stepped out of the car. When I did, I saw them walking toward me, my father, Marcy, and Harmony. Dad looked older, worn down like the last few weeks had drained something vital from him. Marcy wore sunglasses, probably to hide the crying she'd done on the drive over. Harmony, still too young to understand the weight of what was happening, smiled and waved. My father's voice cracked slightly when he said my name. "We came to talk," he said. "To apologize." I didn't say anything. I just looked at them, waiting to see what came next. Marcy stepped forward first. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes hidden behind the lenses. "I know I took advantage of you. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Then Dad followed, a bit softer now. "Come back home, Grant. We can fix this. We'll do better." For a split second, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they finally understood. Maybe the weight of everything had finally cracked the walls they'd built around their entitlement. But then Harmony tugged at my pant leg, looked up with wide, innocent eyes, and said something that shattered all of it. "Uncle, Grandpa says the lights will go out if you don't come back." I froze. Those words weren't hers. A 5-year-old doesn't talk like that unless someone teaches her to. They hadn't come to make things right. They had come because the bills were rising, and they needed someone to absorb the pressure again. Worse, they had coached a child, an actual child, to help manipulate me into doing it. Something inside me went cold. I looked at Harmony, not with anger, but with an aching kind of pity. She had no idea what they had wrapped her into. I knelt and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, kiddo," I said. "Go stand with your mom." Then I stood and faced the 2 adults I had once called family. "You used a 5-year-old to deliver your message," I said flatly. "That's unforgivable." Marcy looked stunned. "It's not what it seems," she started, but I cut her off. "Enough. You lied, manipulated, and you still haven't admitted what you really came here for. You're not here because you miss me. You're here because you can't pay your bills." Dad opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The silence said more than words could. I took a step back toward my front door. "You have 30 seconds to leave," I said. "If you're still here after that, I'll call the police." They didn't argue. Marcy picked up Harmony and turned away. My father hesitated for a moment, then followed. As they walked back to their car, I stood on the porch and watched them go, feeling absolutely nothing. No regret. No sadness. Just confirmation. I had made the right choice. For the next few days, the silence resumed. Then the calls started again, but not from them. First, it was my Aunt Ellen, my mother's sister. She hadn't spoken to me in over a year. Her tone was calm, but under it was the familiar sting of judgment. "I heard you left," she said. "Your father says you've become selfish. What's going on?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even get emotional. I just explained, quietly, clearly, that I had spent over $35,000 over 3 years to keep that house afloat. "I haven't abandoned anyone," I told her. "I've simply stopped letting myself be used." She didn't like that answer. "Family doesn't keep score," she said. "Your father sacrificed a lot for you." I hung up as politely as I could. An hour later, my uncle called. Then a cousin. Then another aunt. One after another, they all delivered the same sermon. Blood is thicker than water. You only get one family, and shame on you for turning your back. None of them asked what really happened. None of them asked why I left or how long I had carried everything. They didn't care about truth. They cared about keeping the family narrative clean. No broken pieces, no ugly truth, just quiet compliance. By the end of the day, I had blocked 6 more numbers. That night, I turned off my phone, pulled out a book, and cooked myself dinner in a pan no one else had touched. 1 year passed almost silently, like the soft closing of a door I'd never reopen. I returned to my old apartment after the tenant's lease ended, declining their renewal without hesitation. The place had changed slightly, new paint, a few scuffs on the floor, but it still felt like home in a way my father's house never truly had. I unpacked what little I brought with me from Racine, set up my desk near the window again, and just settled. 3 months after moving back in, I was promoted at work. My boss pulled me aside during our Monday meeting and said, "You've been sharper, more focused lately. Whatever changed, keep it up." That promotion came with a 40% salary bump, new responsibilities, and for the first time in years, I didn't dread waking up. I didn't think about who might be using my stuff or how much I'd be asked to pay next. I just worked. I earned. I lived. During those months, no one from my family reached out. Not my father, not Marcy, not even Harmony. It was total radio silence, and surprisingly, I never felt compelled to break it. The more time passed, the more I realized that distance was the most honest thing between us. Friends would occasionally ask about them. "How's your dad?" they'd say, or "You talked to your sister lately." I'd keep it simple. "I'd rather not talk about that," I'd reply. Some people respected that boundary and never asked again. Others pushed with confused expressions and words like, "But they're still your family." I didn't explain myself anymore. I had no interest in proving that choosing peace over pressure was somehow wrong. And then, completely out of nowhere, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. At first, I let it go to voicemail. I figured it was another distant relative trying to pull me back into the echo chamber. But when I checked the message, the voice stopped me cold. It was Jonas, Marcy's ex. We had never really spoken before. I barely knew him, other than the 2 brief, uncomfortable dinners we shared when they were still married. He sounded tense, but composed. "Hey Grant," he began. "Sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. Marcy left Olive with me last month. She just disappeared, took off, said she couldn't handle it anymore." I sat on my couch, staring at the phone, unsure whether I had heard him right. "She said she needed time and went to Texas," he continued. "Apparently, she's living with some guy she met online. No forwarding address. Just vanished." For a long moment, I couldn't move. I didn't even blink. I had expected some kind of fallout eventually, but not this. Not Marcy ditching her daughter and vanishing across the country. It didn't surprise me that she collapsed under pressure. She had always leaned on someone else. But to abandon Olive entirely? Jonas paused near the end of his message and added, "I don't know if your dad told you anything, but I thought you deserved to know. I figured they might try something." That last sentence sent a chill through me. They might try something. I knew exactly what he meant. 2 days later, my phone rang again, this time from a different number. I didn't answer. The voicemail that followed confirmed everything. It was my father. He sounded tired, strained, like all the energy had been drained from him. "I'm alone now," he said. "I have no one left." I didn't respond. I didn't call back. Instead, I reached out to a lawyer and drew up legal protection documents, power of attorney exclusions, asset protections, digital will revisions. I sent my father a certified letter with a copy and a simple note attached. "I forgive you, but I won't be your safety net anymore." I half expected that to be the end of it. I thought the message would be clear. But the universe wasn't done yet. About 3 weeks later, I got a text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Marcy." She had resurfaced. I didn't open the message immediately. I stared at the preview notification like it was a snake coiled on my desk. When I finally read the full message, it was a long apology filled with flowery language and strategic omissions. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," it began. "I miss you. I miss our family. I think we should reconnect." No mention of abandoning Olive. No explanation of where she had gone or why she vanished. just nostalgia and soft guilt woven into every sentence. I didn't respond. Then she sent another message. This one shorter, more blunt. I'm coming back next month. I'd like to talk. Face to face. That message gave me pause. Not because I believed her, but because something about it felt rehearsed. It didn't take long before I found out why. A few days later, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw a post from someone I didn't follow but had mutuals with. It was Marcy, smiling beside a man I had never seen. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. Hashtag second chances, hashtag my real life begins." I clicked on the profile out of curiosity. What I found made my skin crawl. The man in the photo was a self-proclaimed life coach, one of those alpha mindset influencers with buzzwords instead of thoughts. His feed was full of toxic nonsense. Real men dominate. High-value women don't need boundaries. Emotions are weaknesses. He had a podcast. He sold online courses. He posted shirtless photos with captions about leading your queen with purpose. Marcy had commented under one photo, "Proud of you, my king. Let's build our empire together." That was the moment I realized she had never changed. She had simply upgraded her manipulation tactics. This wasn't about reconnecting with family. It was about rewriting the narrative. I didn't engage. I didn't comment. I just watched the delusion play out like a low-budget reality show. And it didn't take long before the cracks started to show. 6 months later, everything imploded again. I found out through a cousin's forwarded link to a public Facebook post. Marcy was back in town, and she had been arrested for failing to pay several fines tied to her business license from some failed online coaching scheme. Apparently, she had borrowed money under false names and skipped court dates. Her partner, the Instagram guru, had vanished. That same week, Jonas contacted me again. "She's trying to get custody back," he said. "After everything, she wants to be seen as a victim." I felt nothing. Not rage. Not bitterness. Just clarity. This wasn't my mess to fix. It never had been. I blocked her again that day. And for the first time since all of this began, I realized I wasn't just done with them. I was done needing closure. Some stories don't need endings tied in a bow. Some people don't need to be forgiven out loud. And some lines, once crossed, stay crossed forever. I've built a quiet life now. No drama. No noise. No sudden bills or manipulative birthday parties. Just peace. I open my blinds in the morning without wondering what's been moved or borrowed or taken. And if that means losing a family built on conditions, I'll take it.